But I did just want to welcome everyone. Thank you so much for coming, and thank you for the welcome, Trav. So this is a really exciting topic for us today. We're going to be talking about the Urban Footprint tool. And this, I think, is a great opportunity for health to become involved in transportation and land use planning. And just to quickly review, this year we have a new series of priority initiative strategies related to healthy transportation. And one of our primary goals as an alliance is to integrate public health into transportation land use planning, funding, and decision making. And we really see Urban Footprint as a great opportunity for non-planners to be involved in some of these really critical decisions about how our land use and transportation will affect our future communities. So it's great to focus on this today. So this is really part of our ongoing effort to capacity of our local health department members to understand how land use and transportation planning work. I think this software, because it is very visual, is a great tool for non-planners who wish to become more engaged in these decisions. It provides a visual interface and thereby really empowers users to project how changing specific land uses can impact some of the critical future issues for our communities, including greenhouse gas emissions and vehicle miles traveled. And this is a huge area of potential for our health department staff, our community-based organization partners, and our cities and community members. So I think that this is a new topic, but I think on it on the early side, learning about how this works will really help us get some of our really important partners to the table in these planning processes at an earlier time. So I'm pleased to be able to talk about this today. And again, as Trav mentioned, we've scheduled 2 calls in this series. The goal of today's call is really to introduce Urban Footprint, why it was created, how it works, and to give you a sense of its core functionality, which is, as I understand it, projecting how land use and transportation planning decisions affect VMT, vehicle miles traveled, and greenhouse gas emissions. And those are the sort of critical elements that our metropolitan planning organizations like SANDAG and SCAG are being asked to project as part of SB 375. SB 375, just as a brief review, requires our regional planning organizations like SCAG and SANDAG to develop plans that help meet the goals of AB 32, which is California's Global Warming Solutions Act, and which is focused on greenhouse gas reduction. So SB 375 basically requires that we have plans that help us reduce greenhouse gases statewide. And our next call, this call is going to really focus on the basic software that allows us to do that projection. And our next call will focus on how that same tool, Urban Footprint, can have additional modules added on that allow us to project the co-benefits of those changing land uses and transportation investments. As we reduce greenhouse gas, there are a lot of opportunities for attendant health co-benefits, potentially equity co-benefits, environmental co-benefits. And this tool really has opportunities for us to look at a number of those. But those are, again, kind of things that can be added on to sort of the baseline tool itself. So we're looking forward to talking about sort of the essence of what that is today. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce our speaker. Joe DiStefano is a principal at Calthorpe and Associates, and he leads the regional and large-scale master planning for Calthorpe Associates. He's been an urban planner with more than 17 years of experience in land use and transportation planning and policy at the regional, local, and corridor scales. His research spans from federal and local transportation and land use planning and policy to transit-oriented design and implementation strategies. And he specializes in the relationship between land use, climate, and energy impacts, which, again, is sort of critical to what we're talking about here today. He has an extensive he worked with the Surface Transportation Policy Project in Washington, D.C., where he helped prepare the Smart Growth Toolkit, a decision maker's manual to aid growth management and smart growth practices at the local and regional level. and he has background. He has also worked for with the Los Angeles Metropolitan Transportation Authority and the California Department of Transportation on studies of the Metrolink commuter rail system and the Metro Rail subway and light rail lines. So he has some experience with our Southern California geography. Joe DiStefano received his master's in city and regional planning at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill and a bachelor's of arts and history from the University of California at Berkeley. So without further ado, welcome, Joe, and thank you very much for joining us and talking about this topic on our call today. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right, sounds good.
I'm going to wait for the screen, right? Are you going to give me that? There we go.
Yep, it should ask you if you want control.
Okay, and we had this issue before, so I want to make sure. I'm assuming that now you see the screen. Is that correct? Or do
yes,
you see the
now
screen?
I see your presentation in slide organizer mode.
We don't see the slide show. That's interesting.
So I need,
okay, hold on one second.
you need to project your slides, but I see the slide. I see your PowerPoint screen.
Yeah, I'm projecting the slide, and it's going to my other monitor, and you're not able to see it. So hold on just one second.
Okay. You even did view, rather than the slide organizer, if you just looked at, one slide at a time through the view mode?
Yeah, but it should just work fine. This shouldn't be happening. Hold on a second. I'm just going to move. Maybe it's because Start Meeting is over there. It doesn't. Start Meeting is different than what we normally see. Well, all right. That's not, it keeps on putting it on the other side here. All right. Well, I'll do what you're suggesting there, and we will improvise. Such as
you could probably zoom in and get rid of your ribbon.
If you go to slideshow, you can switch which screen it shows up on.
Oh,
Show
there you go.
on. Over to the right.
Set up. Yep. There you go. Perfect. Hopefully that'll work.
Somehow I became a
Look at that. Thank you.
Oh, awesome. All right.
That's great. That was online technical support. Thank you. Okay. Should I just get moving, Tracy?
Yeah. Thank you again.
Okay. Yeah, of course. It's my pleasure, and thank you. Thanks, everyone, for your interest, and I look forward to a good discussion here. So I'm going to, and that was a great introduction, and especially the context for AB 32 and SB 375, which is really critical context and really the regulatory and sort of big picture window within which a lot of the work that we've been doing over the past few years sits within. So that's great. Really sets it up really well. And so I'll be talking, as Tracy mentioned, about UrbanFootprint, which is an open source software product that we've developed over the past 4 to 5 years and are now working with NPOs across the state of California to kind of set up and deploy, and then ultimately are looking to the jurisdictional scale as well. So I'm going to pretty quickly review sort of the how UrbanFootprint came to exist, what it does, some statewide scenarios, what we're doing with it right now. I'll try to move through that relatively quickly. If we have time, I'll throw a demo up on the screen as well, which is a web-enabled software, our web-enabled software. But I want to make sure we have enough time for some discussion to ask questions. And then, as was noted, we'll be able to follow up next week with Dr. Larry Frank as well with much more detailed information about the public health component of this model, which I know will be of great interest to this group. So just a bit of context. So in 2008, first of all, we've been doing kind of analytical scenario-based regional and large-scale planning for 20-plus years now. We were asked beginning in around 2008 by the state of California, the High-Speed Rail Authority, and then eventually the Strategic Growth Council, to, within the context of, as Tracy's already mentioned, AB 32 and SB 375, really begin to understand the role that land use and coordinated transportation investments have in, initially, VMT and their related carbon impacts. You might recall the debates over, what size of the pie VMT or land use would have in meeting California's AB 32 targets, which, as you know, are 1990 by 2020, and then ultimately 80% below 90 the Kyoto number by 2050, which California has adopted, as even though the nation has not. And so that Vision California project was that project. And what we were tasked with doing, and what we did, was to stitch together myriad plans and policies from across the state that in one way that were able to depict sort of a business as usual land use. And don't worry too much about the clarity. These are probably hard to see. This is business as usual on your left slide versus what was ultimately termed sort of a growing smart scenario, which was to a greater or lesser degree roughly a stitch of the SCSs and blueprints at the time, and at that time around 2010-11 by the time these maps and these scenarios were produced. So the idea is, what are the impacts of land use and transport impacts on a whole range of important indicators, particularly VMT and carbon at the regulatory window, between this range of scenarios. These are just the bookends. We ran scenarios across the board to do that. In order to do that work, we basically, the long story short on the software development, like why we ended up where we are today, is that we basically broke every proprietary tool or tool in the toolbox that we knew of. With monster data sets, this huge process. This is a data committee, so I guess I can geek out a little bit. But the daunting task of normalizing a very disparate language. So every city, every county, every region, sort of described as land uses differently, has different levels of data. All the data basically varies from sort of mediocre to not really very good at all. When it comes to sort of locational specificity, that's just the nature of the beast. It's getting better and better every year. So we were tasked with normalizing and creating a common canvas across all 5 major regions of California, and we just broke everything. We had models that would run for days and never finish. And so we ended up building a couple novel tools. One, RapidFire, which is a programmatic spreadsheet-based model and kind of the baby sister of UrbanFootprint, which is an open-source geospatial model built on fully open-source, non-proprietary software tools and delivered through a web interface, which is what we've been hard at work on over the past year. So I'll get more into that. But bottom line is that we felt like we needed to build, we were compelled to build a better mousetrap. And we built a couple here. And RapidFire has been deployed across the state, including as part of SCAG's RTPSCS in 2012, across the Central Valley, statewide, and outside of the state as well. So, and then UrbanFootprint is being utilized now as well. So we'll talk more about that. In general, we use this sort of fancy term ecosystem, but UrbanFootprint itself is really a combination of different things. It's very, very importantly, a data development and organizational framework. We talked a lot. I just talked about the fact that you need to normalize data. You need to build a data canvas, a very detailed, accurate depiction, and relatively accurate as we can, depiction of what's on the ground today, and you use that to pivot forward into future conditions. And so, easily 80+% of the work associated with getting a system up and running for any system up and running for scenario development and multimetric analysis is in the base data development. So a lot of what UrbanFootprint is and does is a significant reduction in the friction associated with that development. And then ultimately it becomes sort of a vessel whereby updated data can live and breathe. And ultimately the plan would be to be building pipes to data sets so that we can be automatically updating. That's a little bit further down the road. Then there's the bread and butter of what is SimCity for real, scenario development, building out different futures, either via ingesting plans from the outside, painting new futures, editing them within the web interface, which I'll show you, and then analysis. And analysis is really kind of the critical component here. And you can see this is not just about VMT and GHG. It's public health, transportation, energy, water, GHG, household costs, land consumption, fiscal impacts critically. And that's sort of the out-of-the-box, if you will, capability. And that's an expanding set of analytical modules, which we'll talk a little bit more about. So just again, managing and reviewing data. Someone have a question? I'm sorry.
Yeah, this is Carla. Please go back to the last slide really quickly. Just because you're going fast, I want to make sure that we just quickly, walk our folks through this one, which is just to say that the first step on the left that I think we're looking at is you guys looked at what is the existing conditions on the ground, and including what are the existing land uses. And that as you were saying, is complicated because every different city has different ways of expressing their zoning, right? And so, as I understand it, so you have just like this incredibly complicated project of figuring out what's actually happening all across the state. And then in the scenario development, which is this sort of secondary step, this is where it gets into the work of what some of our regional planning organizations are doing. So they look at what could be in their plans. And so you're basically working from the baseline, then you create this additional overlay for these different scenarios, or that's something that they could be doing using the tool, right? And then on the back end, this is analysis. Do I have that right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, and I just wanted to...
Right. So that's good sort of additional context.
Yeah, it's always good to just... a lot of our folks on the call may not have a lot of experience with land use planning, so we just want to make sure that we're slowing it down in certain sections so we can all keep up.
Yeah, no problem. That's great. I appreciate it.
All right, thank you so much. You can keep on going.
Okay, and I'll keep going fast, and you just keep on breaking in as needed if I need to slow something down. I mostly just want to make sure there's enough time at the end. Managing and reviewing data, and this is actually of critical importance right now in the Southern California region. We're back underway now with SCAG. I think Ping Cheng is on the line. And using UrbanFootprint to perform a very important role in just the connection between the locals. And in the SCAG region, there's nearly 200 local jurisdictions, and they do a lot of data review and back and forth and normalization of the sort of SCAG regional database, the parcel base for the 18 million person region. And so we are working on developing those connections to the city, initially for local review, so data review, so being able to be this consistent portal, a common place to review data, and then ultimately to convey more advanced functionality as well, scenario development for general plans and things like that, and we can talk more about that. So managing and reviewing data is one thing. That's sort of the data vessel piece. And then there's the ability to sketch futures. This is a shot of the San Diego region and some of the SCS alternatives we worked on with them in the fall. But really it's sketching futures and then testing their impacts on this range of types, this range of indicators that we had talked about. And it really is this full range that sort of moves the policy needle, changes the discussion, and it's really, I believe, critically important that this not just be about GHG and VMT, but about probably most importantly, health and fiscal and other kind of critical indicators. I mean, we have seen the needle move from a policy perspective in very significant ways, based on other indicators. And GHG just happens to be a co-benefit of these other quality of life indicators. So then just really briefly, back to California in 2050, if you recall business as usual versus growing smart. I just want to run through kind of a range of indicators and how they can be conveyed and used, and these are just some slide interpretations of those. So here's land consumption, for example. This is just a pretty, a fairly simple metric, how much land is consumed to accommodate the same number of people and jobs out to 2050. This is statewide, and this is using a combination of the rapid fire and footprint model to produce all these different metrics I'll show you. So you can see here, California has about a 5,000 square mile urban coverage today. Business as usual more than doubles that. And the growing smart scenario consumes far less land, focused more around high-speed rail and other transit infrastructure, more walkable, compact communities, and very heavily driven towards market demand and emerging preference for multifamily, small lot, townhome, and compact walkable communities. So that's this is an important and a critical metric, and you can break this down further. And here's Southern California's number, if you will. And these are again these numbers are not sort of official. These are a set of proof of concept scenarios. But that is business as usual in SoCal versus the SCS-like alternative, a compact future as it was called. So very significant difference there in the SCAG region. And then when you really start to take a look at what that land means, like here's a number out of Fresno County, more than almost $4 billion in lost production value. This metric, plus a couple other critical fiscal and public health metrics, proved to be very influential in Fresno, and the Fresno City Council adopting one of the most progressive general plans in the state of California. It was really about bringing better information to the table about water consumption and energy consumption, and it just changed the conversation. It was a really, really big deal there. Of course, VMT is a really critical metric, and we always have our fun facts up there. So you can see huge differences, more than 4 trillion miles reduced over the period to 2050, and that obviously has a huge impact on a whole rippling effect, array of indicators, and I'll show you a couple more of those. Here's just a visual of that. This is the baseline 2008 vehicle miles traveled per household in the Southern California region. You obviously know. This is LA down here, and Ventura County, Palmdale. I grew up in LA, by the way, so I'm very familiar with the region and do a lot of work down there. But the green here would be the lowest, like, say 7,000 to 10,000 vehicle miles miles traveled per household, up to 30+ thousand in the more suburban auto-dependent locations. And so, location really does matter. It has significant impacts on things like auto fuel cost, right? So this just $3,000 per year savings per household in 2050 for fuel alone. And the numbers really start to add up when you include utilities and other components as well, and I'll show you those numbers. So really critical to turn these metrics into things that people understand. VMT, what's VMT? But how much money do you spend on fuel? That's critical. Building energy, just the building program alone. These are policy neutral, these scenarios. They all have the same kind of building policies and things like that. These, just the building program, a program more focused on smaller lot, single family and townhome and multifamily, and in more temperate climate zones, saves an enormous amount of energy. So huge part of reducing California's overall energy demand before we start to make up, before renewables, before other components, is in just land use efficiency. So the building program alone saves an enormous amount of energy, and the same is true of water. Smaller lot and townhome, and again in more temperate zones, reduces water use significantly, less irrigated space. And so, again, a big part of dealing with our drought, which is, looking to be a near permanent situation, is in land use efficiency, and this is a big piece of it. A critical one, infrastructure costs for new growth. So one of the things that we really look at carefully is the capital costs for building and maintaining. The capital costs first for building local roads, utilities, wet and dry utilities, sewer, things like that. And the costs are very significant in every city, every region. And then these are the statewide numbers, looking at a nearly $32 billion savings in the capital infrastructure costs associated with supplying services to new growth, to new and existing growth. And then the ongoing O&M costs, which are borne directly by cities and are quite literally bankrupting cities in a few cities across the state of California, are also very significant. So $15 billion additional savings. So you're looking at nearly $50 billion in savings for capital and O&M.
Operations and maintenance.
Operations and maintenance. Yep. So that's the kind of the public works costs, effectively.
Okay.
Associated with servicing and maintaining that infrastructure.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Health indicators. So the initial version of UrbanFootprint includes also a analysis or an analytical capability for active transport and weight-related diseases, auto-ped collisions, and also pollution-related health impacts. This is just sample data you're looking at now. The map is indeed a map of moderate and vigorous activity per person walking, for the most part, blue being where people are walking the most and red being where people are walking the least. And we are currently underway with support from the California Endowment and Strategic Growth Council. There's folks on the call here who are engaged in this process, a peer-review driven process to significantly advance the active transport component of the model and take advantage of the very robust CHIS, California Health Inventory, CHTS, the new statewide travel survey data, and build out a more refined model, and which is slated to continue development through this year and be pilot tested within SACOG's, the Sacramento Council of Governments SCS process, and potentially also in Southern California. So that's a big advancement. So that's an example of a model that has existing capability and that will be significantly advanced. This is a critical indicator. Pollution-related health impacts in particular, which was a metric that we were able to bring to the RTP SCS process in Southern California for the 2012 SCS was a really critical component. So you had American Medical Association, AARP, and others testifying in front of the SCAG board on behalf of more progressive land use. So the health indicator, I think, is really this critical nexus to community and quality of life, and has made significant differences. And I know that's of particular interest to this group, and we can certainly talk a lot more about it. Annual household costs. So boiling this down to the pocketbook is really critical. So we talked a little bit about the fuel costs, but more than $7,000 savings per household in 2050. When your median income is $50,000, this is a very significant portion of household costs. So most of this is related to reduced use of passenger vehicles, or reduced need for in more compact, walkable, and accessible locations. And that's really critical. I mean, it's a huge equity concern. So we talk about this in terms of the importance within elevating social equity as well, just based on the fact that, as it says here, low-income households are bearing the heaviest burden of these increasing housing and transportation costs. So mitigating that significantly by more efficient location is really critical. And then again, this is the regulatory window for all of this was greenhouse gas emissions, continues to be that, particularly as we enter the world of cap and trade and fuels come under the cap in 2015. And these are very significant differences in passenger vehicle and building greenhouse gas emissions, which is what we're focused on. We also look at we're now looking at GHG associated with water, in that 20% of energy in the state of California is used to transport and treat water. So reducing water use has a ripple effect through to carbon as well, and so we'll be adding that to this component as well. But this is so big differences in GHG. Just a really quick run through what we're currently doing and what we've been doing for the past year to year and a half is that we've been working with three of the major MPOs in California, SACOG, SANDAG, and SCAG, to basically in a very focused software development effort to take the capability that we built in the development of UrbanFootprint and bring it to a front-end web interface that allows folks outside of our office for people to really to use, and increasingly more and more kind of groups and types of groups to use over time. We've been focused initially on the sort of MPO power user, if you will, and building out that web interface. SACOG is currently using the model in its SCS development. We worked with SANDAG over the summer and fall of last year to help them develop a first round of SCS and model a first round of SCS alternatives. And then over time, they'll be utilizing UrbanFootprint more in their processes. And then, as I noted, we're also working with SCAG right now to set up and pilot the local review capability and to bring UrbanFootprint's data development and modeling capability into the SCAG agency by the late part of this year. We're also doing work right now with the California Energy Commission to bring the sort of data and analytical capability of UrbanFootprint to bear in statewide energy policy development, but probably more importantly, to work with them to enhance the tool to be able so that it can perform more refined energy policy development and analytics at the local and regional scale. So, the CEC is really interested in the deployment of, this tool or this type of tool to local jurisdictions, and making sure that when local jurisdictions are working on general plans, climate action plans, that they have the ability to, review the impact of state policies, have a consistent and defensible way of measuring building energy, water, and other components. And so we've been doing a lot of work with them on visualization of state policy initiatives, and also on framing out how to develop a tool set focused on the local user, the jurisdiction in particular. As I noted, we're We're in the midst of public health modeling enhancements, which we'll have a lot more time to talk about either today and then, of course, next week. Working with SACOG, we've also integrated much more refined capability on the open space side of things, as opposed to the agricultural world just being agriculture. In Sacramento, they've actually done a lot of work to distribute the open landscape into all the different ag components. So we've built out an agricultural model which estimates the impact of not just changing crops from, say, strawberries to alfalfa, but urban conversion, fiscal impacts, production costs, et cetera, to just round out the discussion in the Sacramento region of the kind of coordinated impact of their land use decisions, their agricultural decisions, and other components. So it's an example of the modular aspect of the model. I'd be happy to talk more about that as well. Likely next steps will be, continued software scaling and enhancements. More of a challenge than typical for software because of the open source nature of the project. Most of the software development is occurring as part of deployment and use. But this is just a quick shot of the user interface, and so we'll continue to enhance that, and more importantly, really continue to enhance the scalability of the model, the multi-user capability. So that's an ongoing process. Analytical upgrades, I talked about the fact that we're working on public health and ag, energy demand and policy. There's also a proposal that's being put together or has been put together with the UC Davis Center for Regional Change and to really elevate social equity and develop kind of a social equity module, if you will. Also a lot of work with the Nature Conservancy and other groups across the state, American Farmland Trust, and the development of Conservation and Ecosystem Services module, and also looking into kind of the focus on climate adaptation and resilience. So kind of that more modular component. Well, I won't go into too much detail here. And then I think that really critically over time, the idea would be, maybe initially through the regions as a kind of more organic process, when urban footprint is set up and data canvases are developed at the regional scale in particular, conveying not just data review, but, really substantial scenario development capability to locals. And allowing that to significantly improve community engagement and planning as it relates to the general plan, the health impact assessment, the climate action plan, and hopefully an integrated approach to all of those is really a longer-term goal, being able to really convey, make better, more informed planning by default much more possible and reduce the friction to that across the state. So I think I won't go through all these now. I've sort of talked about them, but I think I'll leave it at that, and so we have enough time for discussion. This is just some examples of where the results have been utilized to impact policy, and I can talk much more about that in storylines if we want to via the Q&A. So I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Joe. That was it's really an incredible process and an incredible software and great work that you guys are doing, and pretty cool to see the range of co-benefits spelled out like that statewide. So I just want to open the floor. No question is too big or too small here. And does anyone have any initial questions about how this works, what it does? The intent, feel free to chime in.
This is Miguel. I have one question, I think. It's kind of question comment. This is Miguel from Riverside County Department of Public Health. Great presentation, great tool, Joe. I wanted to know what is the future of urban footprint, and you mentioned the example of Fresno, in that they actually used it to make a decision on their newest general plan. The reason I'm asking about the future of urban footprint is because right now there are various cities across the state working on general plan updates, and it seems like they're going through something that is quite major for a jurisdiction right now without, I don't think, using urban footprint. So what would be the sort of, I guess, impact of not having these jurisdictions using it while different MPOs may be embracing it. Does that make sense? I guess what I'm trying to say is that some cities may be left behind. Will there be a way to, for them to revisit the current work they're doing, or, if they adopted a general plan update last year or 2 years ago, will there be a way for them to, I don't know, do piecemeal updates?
Sure. I think what you're asking is, I don't know if I can answer it perfectly, but I get what you're saying, which
it
is
was
that,
not a perfect question.
Yeah, no problem. I can't tell you precisely how urban footprint will be, or the pace at which it will be, say, conveyed to the locals. I think in the SCAG region in particular, the good news is that SCAG is really focused on the local, in part because it's such a big region with so many jurisdictions that the local review capability is really, really critical. It produces a bridge and saves a lot of time and energy and effort once the system is sort of set up. There's a lot of effort in getting it set up, but once it's set up. And once that's set up, then the idea is that the capability can be then, because it's a web-enabled product, the capability can be more easily transferred, if you will, to the locals via, say, Riverside logging in and then seeing its data and being able to use it. That said, the thing that what needs to be happening over the next, year, 2 years, 3 years is really, and something that we've been focusing on trying to get going. It's, tough in this, we've got a few, grant applications and things like that around, including one in Western Riverside, is to, roll up our sleeves and do jurisdictional and sub-regional deployments of the model. So really get in there and figure out, how to best deploy it at the local level. What do the local planner, what do local community groups need? Like, how are they going to utilize it? And so I think that is, the best laboratory in many cases for this is an actual project, so a general plan update, if you will. The good news is that a lot of the work that gets done at the regional scale, which sets up the data canvas, which sets up, if it goes in that direction, sort of calibrating the initial array of analytical engines, that can be conveyed directly down to the locals. You don't have to repeat that work. That work has already been done. This is not a magical tool that just suddenly turns everybody into, scenario planners, but it is one in which I think over time jurisdictions will develop the capacity and be able to do this kind of planning on their own. That's the idea. So, to answer your question, when will there be sort of uniform open access to this? There's so many different things that can impact that, state support, lots of issues. Scaling the software to be, accessible by hundreds of jurisdictions at a time for advanced scenario development is a software undertaking that we have to develop. But I think that the handful of initial pilot projects is really critical, I think, across the state. I think the Southern California region in particular, because of the work that SCAG doing, is kind of ripe for that. And so we're in some ways looking for the opportunities to do that. And the Fresno example, we ingested their general plan alternatives and did some pretty rapid behind-the-scenes integration into the modeling framework and analysis, and then basically conveyed that information back to them, and then they utilized that in their public processes and other components. So ultimately the idea is that Fresno can just do all that themselves, and it's just a matter of advancing the software a little further to that point.
Excellent answer. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Other questions?
Yeah, this is Deirdre from San Diego County, and I noticed that you had some information up on the screen, and I'm from the Health Department, some information about some of the work being done with SANDAG, and is the way that the model, is this something that parts of the model can be used? Can it be adapted for some indicators rather than the entire model? I guess my question is really to the flexibility.
Yeah, absolutely. there's a requisite amount of sort of base data development that just needs to occur. And in the San Diego region, we've built the base data canvas, the parcel, and the MGRA scale, which you're probably familiar with, the Master Geographic Reference Area, as they call it. It looks more like a census block. And so, yeah, I mean, absolutely. There's nothing that says that everything has to happen, you have to do everything, or you have to, even the way that things are going now. I mean, we've got a set of capable models. Some of them are currently a bit static. Some of them are advancing. We're even within the public health componentry, the public health engines, if you will. We're right now focused on the advancement of the active transport piece, and the respiratory and autoped collision piece is remaining in the sort of version 1 state right now. There's not the funding, the resource to pull it all off. So we're really focused on the active transport, the obesity, the related diseases component. And so, no, it's not an all or nothing at all. Because the focus of this model, this model has lots of different sort of levers and vectors. It obviously hits that, and it really is very sensitive to both land use and transport investments and all these different policy levers. So, it's sensitive to the vehicle fleet and specific policies associated with buildings, conservation rates, the energy portfolio, because all of those things are really critical into how much energy or water or whatever we're using. It's not just land use. But because this is so focused on being very sensitive to those land use changes and to land use variation across scenarios, that's really its primary focus. You do need to have the appropriate land base. So you can't really skip that. You can't skip having the solid canvas, but you don't have to focus on everything at once. And I think in some ways that said, I think it's important for someone who's looking at, say, focus on public health, when they look at alternatives, or either that other people have done, or if ultimately they engage with this on their own, that they see the impact across the sectors of a scenario that may have been developed to focus on, say, better indicators or better performance on active transport. So you can look across the page at the energy and the water and the fiscal and the other impacts as well, because it's a really critical part of telling the story.
Thank you.
Sorry, I hope that answered your question.
Joe, this is Tracy from the Alliance, and I've got a question around, we keep hearing all of these reports kind of with worsening climate change predictions, and I'm wondering, how does that fit into the work that you're doing, and how are you kind of adjusting and adapting to these kind of different projections that seem to be coming out now?
That's a really good question. So you're really focused, and just to clarify, this is more about sort of adaptation, resilience, like how do you actually deal with the changing climate and use a tool like this to inform land use decisions?
Exactly. And the fact that, maybe we're really looking at energy issues that are even more extreme than maybe we thought a few years ago. Yeah. Yep.
Absolutely. It's a critical one, and one we've actually been thinking quite a bit about. I think that there's a number of different ways that the model or this sort of framework can better inform and be informed by the changing climate conditions. And so one example that you just brought up on the energy side is that the California Energy Commission is looking at an actual change in the climate zones across the state of California, that we're actually looking at temperature change that's relatively significant over the next decade, and that's actually going to change the zones. And a model like this can basically serve to help people understand what it means when our climate actually changes by just simply, you might be able to pull a toggle and say, I want to run my energy analytics with the new climate zones under different scenarios. Very different, same story with what are considered zones that are more susceptible to wildfire and flood and other components. by no means do we want to be replicating very complex climate models, sea rise change, and things like that, but we can be ingesting that information. And in one way, I think you guys can see my screen right now. This is just a shot of UrbanFootprint. This is just some this is Sacramento County. But if just simply the ability to turn on and have a common place where you can turn on different sea rise scenarios, plan around them. That's one thing. You can use them to inform the building of better plans. And then you can also use them to measure the impact of, what's our current planning. If we stitch together the general plans in the region, what does it look like in terms of people in flood zones, and what are the energy impacts of these sort of changing climate zones? So it allows you to do both, just get a baseline understanding of what the current condition is, what, say, a projected condition would be if you just adopted if you implemented all your adopted plans, and then say, okay, is there a way that we can, do better? What happens if we take on the latest climate change scenarios from NOAA or whoever? Can we build more responsive land use scenarios? So I think that part of it is just all this information, and climate adaptation is just one example, but all this information is just sitting in many different, file cabinets in many different places, and there isn't necessarily a common place to access them and sort of peer-reviewed science by which to review them. And so ultimately what we'd like to do is be creating that portal, that vessel within which that can occur.
Just want to compliment you. It's really impressive what the potential of this tool can do in terms of really communicating to policymakers, what the implications are. I think it gives us a way to actually kind of monetize that and really express that.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, that's the goal. It's absolutely the goal. I mean, I think we've made it a long way there. The undertaking to I'm here. Sorry, I'm just sort of showing the screen in front of you. There is a live interface. And by the way, it's just served up on the Amazon cloud, so this is a live Sacramento County interface. And we're just looking at the existing condition in Sacramento County, and then there's a whole series of tools that emerge that allow you to measure energy and water and VMT and other components sort of live here on the web. This is an ever-evolving tool set, and this is what we've really been hard at work at for the last 18 months, is building out this web interface. But ultimately the idea is that this continues to enhance. Web tech and just software technology is moving so quickly. But the exciting thing is that the ability to visualize, not just maps. When we say visualize, solid data. I mean, think about what the New York Times did and other folks did during the last presidential run, just like really compelling ways of viewing impacts, of comparative impacts, understanding trade-offs. And so our first foray has been in developing that capability for what you'd be kind of an in-house MPO power user. But then I think what I'm really excited about is in the long term also being able to convey that kind of capability to, or refine it and make it work really well in, say, a public workshop or in different forums to be used by advocates or whoever. And so I think that just the ability to on the fly change a scenario and watch comparative analytics change, the potential and the possibilities are really quite exciting. And so again, a lot of it is about finding the right opportunities to extend and utilize this capability. But
what's your recommendation then? Since most of us on the call are not the power user, from MPO, we do have a couple on the line. Is the best idea to try to partner with them to ask to run a couple different types of scenarios, or what's your recommendation there as kind of local health departments getting involved?
I mean, I think definitely staying apace of what's going on at the region is important. I don't want to speak for SCAG or SANDAG as to how to best connect with them on this, but I think that we have a lot of experience over the last 2 or 3 years in which advocates of varying walks of advocacy or life are working with the MPOs and big jurisdictions, and really beginning to kind of get up to speed on what this kind of capability is, so that they can understand what they can reasonably ask initially ask a region to be studying or testing, or support the further exploration of, say, the public health impacts of say, regional SCS scenarios or local general plans. But I think ultimately we'd love to see capability in more hands, and people be able to sort of test varying scenarios and test pivots of an official set of regional scenarios, and then be able to use that in their own bringing new ideas to the table. But I would say that at this point, staying closely connected. I think there are, like at SCAG, for example, and Ping, you can correct me if I'm speaking out of turn, but at SCAG there are lots of kind of committees, and which include folks from various NGO, public, and other agencies, which are focused on different components of the SCS, on modeling, and other pieces. I think public health is one of the focal points. So I think being connected through that, and same with SANDAG, would be a first foray. And I think also, if you have ideas about specific places in the regions that would be interested in sort of digging deeper in a local deployment, which could include digging into the sort of public health components and the local impacts of that, I think that would be another really interesting thing to pursue, is really kind of and a chance to really roll up your sleeves and work with the model, or at least work with the process of developing and analyzing scenarios.
Yes, this is Ping, and thanks, Tracy, I think, for your question. And as Joe mentioned, I think we certainly, I think, welcome, I think, both the participation at the regional level as well as that I think any of your participation, I think, through or with the sub-regions. And we have the sub-regional coordinators, I think, in each of the 15 sub-regions. And I think certainly if right now, I think the focus is really, I think, help to train first the local planning staff, because since they are the one kind of have the primary responsibility, I think, to administer their kind of general plan. But I think certainly would be welcome, I think, to work along with the planning staff, both at the city level or the sub-regional level. And I think certainly, I think SCAG is always kind of welcome. And just to mention very briefly that we are also concurrently, I think, develop a tool. Actually is to track the progress, I think, of the SCS, and on that front, I actually have invited quite a number of representatives, I think, from public health, from active transportation. I think some of the people on this call, that they are also part of that work group. So I think after this meeting, I think feel free to contact me, I think, for any kind of specific way that any of you wants to get more involved at the regional level.
Thank you, Ping. I appreciate that, and I know you've been very good at reaching out to many of us, and it's good to know that if we have a specific idea, we can kind of come to you as well. So thank you.
Sure.
Okay, we are at our time, and I just want to do sort of a over-the-phone applause for Joe. Thank you so much for this great presentation.
Yeah.
This is great. So,
bravo.
My pleasure.
I know.
Yeah, I really appreciate the opportunity.
And I know we're very excited to continue this conversation next week. Hopefully at that time we can talk a little bit more about the active transportation modeling capabilities of UrbanFootprint, as well as the health module, and I think that's going to be really exciting and useful. And again, that call is next Tuesday, the 13th of May, from 3 to 4 p.m. And in the interim, if you have requests for ATP application letters of support, go ahead and send those my way. And next week we'll also try to save a little bit of time to talk about the new Calendar Virus Screen 2.0 update and our work to analyze that new software. So thank you everyone again for your participation on the call, and we'll look forward to talking with you next week. And we will post this
Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
Thanks, Joe.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
For people.
Yeah, of course. No problem. Thank you.